this isn't just any pigeon. In 2020, it sold for a whopping $1.8 million, setting a world record that still stands today. To you, that might sound completely insane, but to a select few, it's completely rational. One of those is 6-time heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson, who arguably loves pigeons more than boxing.
I stole cars too, but my pigeons were my heart.
Yeah.
I would steal the cars to buy the pigeons. I would rob houses to buy pigeons and buy pigeon food.
In fact, the first time he ever fought someone was over a pigeon.
People I got in fights over birds. My first fight I ever had was over a pigeon.
Ever?
Yeah, and that led me to here.
Now, obviously, Tyson is an outlier. For most people, pigeons are seen in a more negative light. They poop everywhere, spread disease, and cause over $1 billion in damages each and every year, earning them the title of the world's most hated bird. But believe it or not, once upon a time, people like Mike Tyson were not only common, but were the status quo. Pigeons were not only loved, but literally worshipped. So what happened? How did the pigeon come to be so disliked by society? And why do some people still love them so much? At least enough to spend $1.8 million. Well, in order to answer that question, we need to go back to the very beginning, before humans even existed. Like most birds, the pigeon is basically a feathered dinosaur that has roamed the earth in one form or another for 30 million years. For comparison, us humans have only been here for a mere 130,000. However, unlike most birds, the pigeon doesn't migrate. Instead, it picks one spot and adapts to living there year-round. This made them incredibly easy to domesticate, leading early cavemen to start keeping them around 10,000 years ago, more than likely for food, as their massive breast muscles account for 1/3 of the bird's entire body mass. For these reasons, soon massive pigeon coops became a staple of any flourishing empire. Archaeologists discovered one in Israel that could hold up to 120,000 birds. And through the pigeon's prevalence in ancient society, it didn't take long for it to gain religious significance. In some places, they were worshipped, in others, they became a staple of ritual sacrifice. The largest of which, 58,000 pigeons were slaughtered. With how much pigeons were being used by humans, it wasn't surprising that they soon stumbled upon their miraculous ability to return exactly to their home from nearly anywhere. An ability granted to them by being able to sense the Earth's magnetic field with their lima bean-sized brain. Logically then, you could take a pigeon from its home, tie a message to it, and then let it fly back where it came from. The Egyptians were the first to discover this, a truly monumental moment in human history. The Greeks would use them to announce the results of the first Olympic Games. The Romans used them to deliver news of their battles in Gaul, and pretty much every great power in history adapted the pigeon for this use. Little did the Egyptians realize that what they had discovered would be the dominant way for humans to communicate for the next 2,000 years. When the New World was discovered, pigeons were of course brought over, introducing the bird to a completely different continent. And later in 1835, Charles Darwin also made the journey over in order to work on his theory of natural selection in the Galapagos Islands. Or so the story goes. Because actually, if it wasn't for him being completely obsessed with pigeons, someone else entirely would have made the discovery of natural selection. In fact, if his book outlining his theory flopped, his editor recommended him to write a book on pigeons. Why? Because that was truly a topic that people were interested in. And I'm being completely serious. By this point in time, their usefulness as messengers had only increased, especially in the application of warfare, where good information is often more useful than the actual troops on the ground. Then, in the year of 1914, an assassination of a single man would set off a chain of events that would lead to a war fought on a scale previously thought unimaginable. The First World War had begun, and pigeons would play a massive role in it. By the time the Great War had begun, most nations' militaries already had established pigeon corps. As the name would suggest, these corps were dedicated to the handling and training of messenger pigeons. But by this point in time, there were other methods of communication. The telegraph, a competing form of long-distance messaging, proved to be impractical on the battlefield. Despite having the ability to send messages near instantaneously, it was hard to move around, expensive to manufacture, and required intact telegraph lines for use. On the flip side of the coin, the Pigeon with a 98% success rate could be speedily sent out by anyone from anywhere. As a result, many soldiers were sent out into the muddy trenches of the front line with pigeon cages strapped to them. By war's end, it's estimated that 500,000 such pigeons were deployed, 20,000 of which lost their lives. And one of them can be seen on display at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. A pigeon by the name of Jeremy, who single-handedly saved the lives of nearly 200 American soldiers by delivering a message after being shot 3 times. Somehow, with half of his head blown off, his chest ripped open, and a severed leg, he flew for 20 minutes straight and delivered a message that stopped a friendly fire artillery barrage. 20 years later, despite significant advancements in long-distance communication technologies, pigeons were still extremely useful in the Second World War. After all, wires can be cut and radios can be intercepted, but pigeons, well, they're pigeons. When the Nazi Party first assumed power, Heinrich Himmler, the primary orchestrator of the Holocaust, declared himself the head of the German National Pigeon Society, yes, that's a real thing, and confiscated all of the best birds in preparation for war. By the time the US was involved, it had tripled its pigeon corps to 54,000 birds, which were cared for by over 3,000 pigeoneers. Since World War I, breeding allowed for the average pigeon to fly significantly faster and around twice as far. Some of these birds were trained to fly with miniature cameras to conduct reconnaissance missions, submarines used them to send out urgent messages to land, and partisans along with spies used them because of their secrecy. One pretty bizarre experimental application of pigeons in the war was homing missiles, where a bird would be placed inside of a missile and trained to peck at a target on screen. The missile would then adjust based on the pecks, allowing the bird to guide it on its kamikaze mission. But sadly, we never got to see this, for a lack of better words, epic technology put to use. After the Second World War had ended, in the years that followed, communication technology had finally improved just enough to where pigeons were, for the first time in all of human history really, an inferior form of communication. In 1957, the United States officially shut down its pigeon courier program. But many other world powers did continue to use them, and they especially became prevalent in guerrilla warfare, where insurgents, lacking state-of-the-art communication technology which leave them exposed to getting hacked, often used pigeon couriers to deliver top-secret information. Now, around the time the US did shut down its military pigeon program, the bird was becoming popular elsewhere, or should I say everywhere, because feral pigeons were starting to swarm cities all across the globe. The question now was, where the hell did these things come from, and why are there so damn many of them in our urban centers? The thing is, pigeons in nature evolved to love to nest within the nooks and crannies of cliff sides. So once humans started to build concrete jungles full of tall buildings with plenty of ledges, we accidentally created the exact environment that pigeons evolved to seek out. Sprinkle in the fact that there is plenty of food for scavenging from people, and well, it's pretty obvious we created pigeon heaven on Earth. And through the years of us domesticating them for our use, every once in a while they simply run away and become feral, nesting in these cities. Additionally, there is the fact that the bird doesn't migrate, meaning that it can and will produce pigeon babies year-round, and a lot of them. It's quite wholesome that once pigeons mate, they do so for life. Isn't that sweet? What isn't so wholesome is that they produce anywhere from 12 to 18 babies a year, and they live anywhere between 6 to 12 years themselves, meaning that just 2 pigeons can produce over 100 others. The seemingly overnight, sudden, and constant intrusion of pigeons into our lives suddenly made many people feel less positive towards the bird, especially considering the scientific fact that they poop every 15 to 30 minutes. And any sort of feces does carry disease, so naturally people started to get health concerns, which spread to the common myth of pigeons themselves being disease-riddled, just like rats. which eventually led to the popularization of the phrase rats with wings. Of course, the fact that they go number 2 so often also means that there's always a chance that a rogue bird could simply ruin your day by their excrement landing on your head. On top of that, they constantly beg you for food, which can get quite annoying over time. But there are also some very real and negative effects of pigeons populating cities. Pigeon feces is actually quite acidic, and over time it can do damage to buildings and infrastructure. In the year 2000, it's estimated that pigeon feces caused over $1 billion in damages across the United States, a finding that qualified pigeon prevention as an extremely lucrative industry. The war on pigeons had begun. At first, they tried to straight up kill the birds by shooting them with guns, but that doesn't really help the problem since they repopulate so damn fast. Same goes with poisoning the ledges that they nest on, which creates the additional problem of poisoning falcons or any other predators that naturally consume the bird. The solution really seems to lie in installing thin, nearly invisible wires that prevent pigeons from nesting in the first place, or using reflective material that temporarily blinds birds when they look at it. Both are costly processes that require quite a lot of maintenance, but to some it's quite worth it. However, to a select few in this pigeon-hating world, the pigeons themselves are the ones worth the money. In 2020, a single pigeon sold for a record-breaking $1.8 million. And to the person who bought the bird, it was well worth it. Because that pigeon wasn't just any pigeon, it was a racing pigeon. Pigeon racing first started to gain popularity in the early 19th century as pigeons were gradually being replaced by the telegraph. And in Belgium, people found a new use for them: gambling. Shortly after World War II, 1 in 9 families there raced pigeons, as it was a cheap form of entertainment that allowed them to be social. However, as other forms of entertainment gained popularity, such as various sports, television, and eventually video games, pigeon racing started to die out in Europe. But oddly enough, in the 1980s, it started to become really popular among the wealthy elite of Asia. There, the rewards for winning a race could be anywhere from a few hundred to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And because the rewards started to become so steep, so did the evaluations of the pigeons that had the highest chances of winning them. Birds could not only win money and prizes, but like horses could be studded out, and their stuff sold to other pigeon breeders. The soaring price, pun intended, of racing pigeons led thieves to start to set up nets along racing routes in order to steal a few birds, which would then be ransomed back to their owners for a hefty sum of money. This caused the expensive races to be switched to being held offshore over the ocean, and the race routes to be kept secret until the last possible moment. So now you understand that racing pigeons are more of an investment than anything. But there are some who genuinely don't care about the money. They're simply into the pigeons for the sake of the birds themselves. One of these people is Mike Tyson, who loves pigeons arguably more than boxing. Born into a broken, poverty-stricken home in Brooklyn, New York, Tyson was a young, awkward boy with a lisp. Nothing about his future was at all certain, but one certainty in a city that would always be there was pigeons. Mike found a hobby in caring for them. It was both cheap and extremely fulfilling, and many others in Brooklyn did the same.
Our bird thing is real ego, it's real masculine.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Most guys that have birds are like gangster guys, tough guys.
Did you ever take somebody with birds and you got a problem for it? They came back trying to get their bird?
Nigga.
In Mike Tyson's world, pigeons were a status symbol. One's coop was an extension of one's self. An insult to your pigeons was an insult to your very being, and this led to quite a bit of conflict.
But yeah, some guys got thrown off roofs, some guys got shot.
And as mentioned in the intro, his very first fight was over a bird. And through the highs and lows of his career, pigeons were always there to keep him centered. There are a surprising number of people out there like Tyson. Some of them simply breed pigeons because they enjoy it, others to compete in pigeon pageants, some simply hold on to them for their company, some feed them in parks, and there are even small groups of pigeon activists fighting against anti-pigeon initiatives, and an underground culture of pigeon shooting in the United States. No countries in the world explicitly protect the pigeon, nor do any claim it as their national bird. It's a nomad, a vagrant, a relic of a time where it was once revered by the humans around them. So next time you're at a park, take a look at the pigeons near you. You might be surprised as to what you find. These birds have been here long before us. They've been our companions for thousands of years. In your observations, you'll see pigeons of all shapes and sizes, some even with racing trackers still attached to their legs. And maybe, just maybe, you might find a friend.